Warning, this video could be extremely boring because it is how G-4 visa holders should complete the IRS tax form called a W-8BEN. The video might be boring, but I assure you it will be extremely valuable. So here we go. Simply put, Form W-8BEN or Form W-9 is required by all U.S. financial institutions, such as banks, credit unions, and brokerage firms. The reason for this is so that they can determine the proper income tax withholding and reporting based on whether you are a non-resident of the U.S. or a U.S. person. If you're a G-4 visa holder, it is very, very likely that you are a non-resident for income tax purposes, and therefore you should complete the Form W-8BEN and not the Form W-9. You'll probably find the instructions to the W-8BEN a little daunting and confusing because, of course, they were written by the IRS and Treasury. Also be aware that the staff of the financial institution that you may be working with may also be confused or even unaware of the Form W-8BEN. G-4 visa holders who open U.S. financial accounts can get into tax trouble if they don't fill out the proper paperwork. So today, I'm going to walk you through the form and then discuss a few related topics at the end of the video. Firstly, what is the Form W-8BEN and why is it required? The W-8BEN, the title to it is Certificate of Foreign Status of Beneficial Owner for United States Withholding and Reporting for Individuals. As I mentioned earlier, one of the main purposes of this form is so that U.S. financial institutions can determine whether you are a resident or non-resident of the United States for income tax purposes, so that they can execute your tax withholding properly and also report properly. If you prepare the Form W-8BEN correctly, they will hopefully withhold your income tax properly, and this may allow you to not even have to file a U.S. income tax return at all. I emphasize may not because it depends on your particular facts and circumstances. You see, it's important to note that tax non-residents are subject to a flat 30% withholding tax on certain types of U.S. source income. One example of this is U.S. source investment income subject to 30% withholding is dividends from U.S. stocks. The payor, typically a U.S. brokerage firm, is obligated to withhold the 30% tax. If you complete the W-8BEN properly, the brokerage firm should automatically withhold this 30% tax and pay it over to the IRS for you. Another important issue is that even though interest income from U.S. payors is considered to be U.S. source income, interest income that you may receive from banks and credit unions is tax exempt to G-4 visa holders who are non-residents. That means that the interest you receive from the Bank Fund Staff Federal Credit Union, the IDB Global Federal Credit Union, the United Nations Federal Credit Union, etc., is not subject to U.S. income tax at all if you are a non-resident. All this to say is to please fill out the W-8BEN correctly. It's in your best interest. Now, let's go over the form line by line as it relates to G-4 visa holders who are non-residents. Part 1, Line 1, Identification of Beneficial Owner. The name provided here is usually going to be your name, unless, of course, in the unusual circumstance, you're actually acting on behalf of someone else and their money. Line 2, Country of Citizenship. This seems to be self-explanatory, but it's not. The instructions say that if you are not a tax resident in your country of citizenship, then you should input the country where you were most recently a tax resident. Now, the United States is one of only a few countries in the world that taxes based on citizenship. all other countries in the world consider tax residency to be based on geographic location, so that if you are no longer living in that country, you are likely not a tax resident there. The term tax resident means you are subject to worldwide taxation in that country, and most G4s will simply input the last country where they were living before coming to the United States. This usually will be the last country where you were a tax resident. Now, line 3, permanent residence address. The instructions say this is generally the country where you are currently a tax resident. Now remember, most G4s are not a tax resident in the foreign country and not a tax resident in the U.S. So the instructions go on to say, if you do not have a tax residency in any country, your permanent residence, and what you fill in here, line 3, is where you normally reside. So, for G4 visa holders, if you've moved to the United States in order to have a career at one of the international organizations, it is most likely that you are no longer a tax resident in the other country, the foreign country that you came from, and therefore your permanent residence address is now the United States, the place where you normally reside. Unfortunately, a common occurrence is that U.S. financial institutions, especially ones located outside of the D.C. area or New York City area, often do not understand G4 non-resident status, and therefore they don't understand how an individual can work and live in the United States for many years and continue to be a non-resident. They especially don't understand how a non-resident can have a permanent residence address in the United States. So what you'll find is that some financial institutions will not have the ability to process a W-8BEN for a non-resident who lives in the United States. But be assured, the income tax regulations clearly provide for this situation. In such a case, the regulations require the financial institution to collect some additional documentation and an explanation from that non-resident as to why they have a U.S. permanent address. The institution may even have a form that provides such an explanation by way of a checkbox that says something like, I am a G4 visa holder, or the spouse of a G4 visa holder, therefore I am non-resident but reside in the United States. So what should you do if you are a G4 visa holder and are trying to work with a financial institution that can't process your paperwork because you have a U.S. address? My suggestion is to find a financial institution that has the capability to accept the form W-8BEN. Okay, enough about that. Now let's go back to line 4, the mailing address. Well, luckily that is self-explanatory, whatever your mailing address is. So line 5, U.S. taxpayer identification number. So most G4 visa holders will have a U.S. Social Security number, and if you do, you're to put your U.S. Social Security number right there on line 5. Going on to line 6, foreign taxpayer identification number. If you even have one, you are required to input the foreign taxpayer identification number that is yours right here on this line 6. Now for line 7, the instructions say you may use a reference number, such as your account number, and input your birth date on line 8. So part 2, let's go on to part 2. This part is only required to be completed if the individual is a tax resident of a foreign country that has an income tax treaty with the United States. Again, to reiterate, G4 visa holders are generally not tax residents of any foreign country, and they're not tax residents of the United States. Therefore, this whole section usually should just be left blank. Now, how do you know if you're a tax resident of a foreign country? You are only a tax resident of a foreign country if that country taxes you on all your worldwide income. If you're only taxed on income earned within that country, such as rental income, you are not considered a tax resident. Again, most G4s should simply leave Part 2 blank. Lastly, Part 3 certification. Here you are certifying that, among other things, you are the beneficial owner of the investment income from the financial institution, and you are not a U.S. person. In other words, you are a non-resident. If this is true, sign the form. And that's all there is to it. So in summary, most G4 visa holders will complete Part 1, leave Part 2 blank, and sign and date the form in Part 3. Well, this has been Dale Mason. Thank you very much.